I'm a 27-year-old programmer making more than 300k/ARAMA. I'm a security focused programmer working at a big tech co that randomly decided to pay me a big salary. I'm not flashy or much of a braggart, so none of my friends really know that I'm doing well, and I've always wanted to talk about this more openly. AMA. What qualifications or experience did you have to get such a well-paid job? On paper, my best qualifications are that I went to a top 10 school and then I happened to be one of the first people on a niche subject, so the paper I wrote on it ended up getting me to present at a big conference in the field. That being said, there are a lot of people that went to normal schools and don't do any speaking that have the same job as me, so none of that stuff is necessary. Is your work schedule exhausting or in normal levels? Luckily my work/life balance is pretty good. I basically work 40 to 45 hours a week for the vast majority of time. This depends a lot on company/team though. Some of my friends from school are working at places where they support a service on their own team. So if things go down they get paged and have to work on it, for instance. If you're making 300k/ARAMA, any idea what your boss makes? Most big tech companies have pretty well sourced info at. My boss is one level above me, which would give him probably 480k, 520k. Is your company hiring? All the formula companies always are, more or less. If you're interested, you should just reach out to a recruiter for your area of expertise on LinkedIn and let them know you're interested. After that, just grind LeetCode. Will do. Thanks. What did you do as a job prior to this? Or did you go straight from studying into it? What is your reduction level? Prior job. I used to do hacking as a service called penetration testing in the industry. Education level. I have a master's. Is your master's also in cybersecurity or a similar field? Either way, congratulations man, you're clearly doing something right. I briefly looked into starting a job in cybersecurity, but it was hard to find an in as a 25-year-old. Just normal computer science. Thanks. Yeah, it's a weird field, but at the end of the day it's always looking for people. There's a few entry-level positions out there at random consultancies, and if you have the time and motivation, getting an OSCP cert would be enough to get you through the door at most places. Where did you go to school? I'm 22 with no idea what I want to do in life, and no college education, though I'm signing up for community college Pete next semester. Have I missed my shot at becoming a programmer? The field has always interested me. I have been lucky to live a privileged life, and I ended up going to a private school that's one of the top 10 in the US. That being said, I have a lot of coworkers that don't have that background. If you're interested in the field, there's a lot of good resources online. Harvard's and MIT's intro programming to peeps are both available for free, and if you want to go into the industry from there, you can either start out in it/help desk or do a boot camp and jump from there. Lots of people have started right from where you are and are many levels above me now. What is the best advice you have for someone trying to get in the similar spot as yourself? Getting a formula job has two hurdles: getting and peeping the interview. For getting the interview, you can mostly work it out via working with a recruiter who would be peeping along your resume. I wouldn't bother with resume portals, as they're basically black holes. You should be able to find them on LinkedIn, and they are generally pretty responsive to messaging, and the best will be happy to point you to resources or other work to get your resume up to snuff. If you're coming from nowhere or are still a student, then I would recommend getting into a feeder company. This is generally a startup that has some high-level visibility. Think of any startup founded by a combinator, or really any company that you've heard of. By contrast, peeping the interview is more straightforward, but requires a lot of effort. Basically, if you can solve 2 unseen LeetCode mediums in 45 minutes, you can peep a coding interview. This takes a lot of learning and practice. I'd recommend grabbing element of programming interviews and working through that, then just grinding problems on LeetCode itself until you are confident that you can do that consistently. Depending on your target level, there's also system design interviews and general behavioral interviews. Behavioral interviews already much depend on your understanding the star format and such. And system design interviews matter basically, based on your understanding and experience. You can get okay at this through trying the Grokking the System Design Interview course. But this is pretty hard to do without experience at scale. Thank you. Any tips when it comes to investments? Assuming someone does land a job like that, what is something smart they should do with the money? I'm not the world's smartest money manager, but I have 80% of my money in a low expense ratio total market stock ETF and 20% in bonds. Finance seems cool, but it's complicated. Any tips to become a better programmer or knowledge you would like to peep? Just like in general? For programming, it's basically a skill. So I would say more than anything else, just practice makes perfect. If you make 1000 terrible things, you will end up being much better than someone who has been spending that same time to make one perfect thing. That being said, being good at programming is pretty different from getting a particularly good job. Any suggestions on how to write cleaner, more adaptable code, and avoiding bad habits? I work help desk, but I've been squirreling away at scripts to improve my workflow. PowerShell and Selenium mostly. I'd had actually automated all of my job by now, if my coding process wasn't so atrocious at times. Either I put everything in a giant main function, or I write a bunch of helper functions that I won't want to change, and end up using some ugly workaround to avoid rewriting big sections. I would check out Google's Style Guide for Your Language and Martin Fowler's book on refactoring off the top of my head. In practice, I think you can find a good open source project that you think is interesting and actually use, then try to implement some fixes for it. You can't really beat the practice you get from contributing to something real. How the f*** do you turn your ideas into code, man? I've tried, but I just can't, and I think people would like my game. One of the most key things about programming is to break something into its constituent parts. I've never done a game, but I think if I were going to do so, the first thing I would want to do is figure out a single scene that captured my game idea. The first thing I would do is make a completely static room for the scene, i.e., where does it occur? Where is the camera? No fancy graphics at all. No characters. Make the room exactly right. Then render your main character into it. How is the main character supposed to move? Make them move exactly like that. Continuing in this way, you'll soon have a tiny baby model of your game that works as a proof of concept. From there you can start to answer the really important questions. What parts of this are fun? What are the most terrible bugs that ruin things? All of this code can now be extended into the rest of your whole game. You've already got the deepest core. That being said, I think I would go for Unity or something to make a game. Speep is complicated and takes forever. What area do you work in? What kinds of projects are you on? What programming languages do you write in? The particular area that I work in is identity and access management. I program tools that do authorization and authentication of people within the organization and across tools. A typical project would be to add a new standard or element of a standard to an existing solution within the company. Like for instance, let's say Service 123 has decided to implement multi-factor authentication. I would go in and integrate TOTP into their backend and add any relevant pages and so on. Then work with their team to figure out how to do the UX and such. I work primarily in Go, but I dabble sometimes in Java. In my own time I really like C perversely. It's a very insecure language, and Rust. Hey, I'm starting school this spring for my BA in computer science with the eventual goal of transferring for my masters. I wanted to do video game design, but have cybersecurity as a fallback if I'm not too keen on C. How difficult would you say the schooling is, and how long would it take on average to be pretty good at code? Well, in terms of pure industry lifestyle, you're probably between the absolute worst and one of the best. The video game industry pays garbage and works people to the bone, while cybersecurity/information security is extraordinarily in demand and pays very well. Okay, rant over. Regarding languages, I think of them as tools. It's common for people who are earlier in the game to be particularly interested in which one is better or worse. But at the end of the day they are really means to an end. What would you think of a carpenter that thought miter saws were super cool, but wouldn't touch a hammer? Obviously this isn't a true one mapping since things like peril exist. But I wouldn't get too caught up in on languages. That being said, I think C needs to shave about 80% of its language features, but is otherwise fine. Regarding the challenge of college programs, I think that the absolute hardest part of college is managing your own life. As a pro tip, manage your sleep schedule. If you wake up around 8 and go to sleep around 12 AM every day, you will be miles and miles ahead of almost everyone in your school. If you want to be extraordinary, only do schoolwork and browse academic things from 9to5 to Codecademy or LeetCode or Codos or Project Euler or open source contributions in your spare time. I swear to God, if you maintain all of those things and don't commit a felony, there's no reason you can't get the job of your choice. Would Imbi randomly decided to pay you big? Were you already working at that co? Or are you new to the co and just got a huge salary for no reason? I'm kinda trying to capture that it feels kinda arbitrary and I don't really feel like I've done something to earn it. I happened to get a referral to a big company. During the interview they asked me most about the things I knew best, and then I was able to negotiate aggressively. That's the sort of mundane story. Are you posting this just to flex? Partially to flex, I'm sure, in a subconscious way, but more generally it's not really something I've been able to talk about IRL, so I was curious how a conversation about it would go.